The world does not run on compassion. It does not run on fairness. It does not run on those comforting slogans about an economy that will somehow stabilize forever like a bedtime story for adults. It runs on cycles, and cycles are not moral. Cycles do not care about your tears. They do not care about your hard work, your good intentions, or the way you showed up for your family. When the cycle turns, money moves, quietly, ruthlessly, and the people who survive the turn are rarely the ones who are loudest about justice. Here is the painful truth the mainstream never tells you. During a crisis, money does not vanish. It migrates. It relocates from the terrified hands to the patient hands. From people who treat assets like meaningless numbers to people who treat assets like control mechanisms, like levers that move the future. So in this video, I am going to show you how the hidden self gets trained to accept being drained. Why most people interpret crisis as personal failure when it is actually a planned redistribution of power, and how a new class of wealthy people is built not after the crisis, but inside it, while everyone else is busy panicking. Welcome to the hidden self, where the uncomfortable part is not the information. The uncomfortable part is recognizing yourself inside it, because you do not lose money only because of bad luck. You lose money because your mind learned to behave like prey. You learned it through family stories, social media brainwashing, career survival instincts, and the quiet fear that you might fall behind if you do not obey the crowd. Crisis does not invent that behavior. Crisis only exposes it and rewards it for being predictable. Let's start with the simplest question and answer it without romance. What is a financial crisis, really? Most people think it is a storm that randomly destroys livelihoods. That is the fairy tale. The real function of a crisis is a filter. It tests who can keep their structure when prices collapse, credit tightens, and attention becomes unstable. A crisis is the moment when the system separates those who can hold from those who must sell, those who can wait from those who need relief today, those who can stay calm from those who convert fear into impulsive decisions. And the system is not careless. It is not incompetent. It is designed like a machine with feedback loops. First comes the seduction phase. Money becomes cheap enough to feel like permission. Interest rates drop, credit expands, and everyone gets the same intoxicating message. The future is easy. You can borrow now. You can speculate now. You can upgrade your lifestyle now. You can justify risk with the word opportunity. This is where the hidden self gets trained to confuse momentum with destiny. People look at rising prices and think they are observing growth, but they are really observing a behavioral drug. Everyone is reacting to the same cheap fuel. When fuel is abundant, even bad decisions look genius for a while. That is the trick. The mind starts to believe its own narrative. Micro story. Imagine a young couple, early 30s, both working, stressed but hopeful. They see a rising market and they tell themselves, "We finally found our chance." They take a loan that stretches their monthly budget to the edge. At first, they feel relief. Relief is addictive. Relief makes you ignore the risks that do not scream. Then the news channels start repeating a new religion. Don't miss the rally. If you hesitate, you are falling behind. If you question it, you are negative. The hidden self absorbs this. It becomes a survival reflex. Next phase is the leverage addiction. The debt does not just finance purchases, it finances identity. The loan becomes part of the story you tell yourself. I can do this. I am smart. I am ambitious. I am not like those people who stayed behind. And when prices rise, that identity gets fed dopamine. Then comes the tightening phase, where the machine becomes visible. Rates rise, liquidity drains, the cheap money stops being free. Now the same people who celebrated leverage discover the brutal math they were avoiding. Debt is not neutral. Debt has a schedule. It does not care about your intentions. When the cost of borrowing increases, your monthly obligations do not shrink. Your buffer collapses. At that moment, the hidden self tries to bargain with reality. You start negotiating with time. You start thinking you can outsmart the cycle. You can convince yourself that if you hold a little longer, the market will return. You do not want to face the truth that you already participated in a trap. Not because someone held a gun to your head, but because you were emotionally recruited by the crowd. Then the crisis hits, and the crisis becomes the auction. When fear spreads, prices fall. When prices fall, margins get squeezed. When margins get squeezed, forced selling begins. This is the key psychological mechanism. Forced selling does not require you to be irrational. It only requires you to be trapped, trapped by debt payments, trapped by commitments you promised your family, trapped by the expectation that you must maintain your lifestyle, trapped by the need to look successful, trapped by the humiliation of admitting you miscalculated. Once you are trapped, you do not make strategic decisions. You make escape decisions. You sell whatever you can sell quickly. You lose not only money, but bargaining power. And here comes the part that feels almost insulting. While everyone else is selling, someone else is buying, usually with cash, usually with patience, usually with institutional leverage that is not drowning. They are not just buying assets, they are buying time, future cash flows, and control over supply chains. You think wealth is a talent. It is not only a talent, it is also a posture toward crisis. There is a reason the rich are often described as lucky. Luck is what people call it when they cannot see the preparation. When you are prepared, crisis is not chaos. It is inventory. A crisis is a store opening where the shelves are full of discounted assets and the customers are panicking. The ones who can still breathe become customers. The ones who cannot breathe become victims. Now, you might ask, is this always the same, or is it just a conspiracy? Here is the truth teller answer. You do not need a conspiracy for this to work. You need incentives. You need institutions with power. You need markets that respond mechanically to liquidity. You need people who are psychologically predictable. Incentives create repetition. Psychology creates outcomes. History does not repeat exactly, but it rhymes. In the Great Depression of the late 20s, the bubble formed through speculative euphoria. People chased fast money and treated markets like shortcuts to salvation. Then liquidity vanished. Banks collapsed. Thousands waited in lines for bread while the powerful used the collapse period to consolidate control. When the crowds suffered, the hierarchy reorganized. Then you have the Asian financial crisis of the late 90s, where currency devaluation, external capital pressure, and institutional intervention reshaped who owned what. The rhetoric was rescue. The outcome was consolidation. Again and again, during collapse, ownership transfers. And in the 2008 financial crisis, the greatest transfer of debt in modern history did not only destroy households. It protected certain institutions under the promise that they were too big to fail. That protection was not a gift. It was a strategy to stabilize the system while allowing the ownership structure to shift. After the smoke, large investment funds bought massive quantities of seized properties. Whole generations became renters in the place they used to call home. Now look closely at what all these stories share. It is not the event, it is the rhythm. Seduction, leverage, tightening, panic selling, asset consolidation, new order. The system does not need to invent new tricks every decade. It only needs the same human weakness to recycle itself. And the weakness is always the same. Most people confuse crisis emotions with crisis intelligence. They treat panic as information. They treat headlines as truth. They treat social pressure as reality. They treat the crowd's fear as a reason to surrender. The hidden self loves surrender because surrender is simple. It ends the internal conflict. You do not have to think. You just have to follow. But following is what turns you into an asset for someone else. So let's talk about the moment you should recognize the cycle turning. Because knowing in theory is not enough. You need signals you can feel in your body. When the yield curve starts behaving like a warning flare. When borrowing conditions flip from easy to punishing. When central banks shift from tightening to liquidity support. When market fear indicators hit extremes and the crowd reaches the point of exhaustion, that is the transition zone. It is where the old order bleeds and the new order prepares. The hidden self hears this and tries to romanticize it. It wants a magical prediction. But what you need is pattern recognition. One signal is the behavior of interest rates across maturities. When the curve inverts or flattens after long inversion, it often means stress has reached a point where the system starts planning the next liquidity response. The machine may already be collecting itself. Another signal is the central bank's pivot, not just statements, the actual direction of policy. When the language changes from "we will fight inflation by tightening" to "we will support liquidity," that is not hope. That is a signal that the system is about to re-enable credit. Smart capital moves first. Emotional capital follows later. Another signal is market fear becoming crowded and performative. When fear indexes spike and the news ecosystem starts celebrating despair, that is often when prices near lows, not because the market is suddenly good, but because the last available sellers finally sell. They run out of energy, they run out of belief, and when they stop believing, someone else can buy. And one more signal is legal and policy drift toward consolidation. People ignore policy until it hits them. But policy is where power becomes permanent. When regulations suddenly make mergers easier, when governments act as if they are stabilizing while building a framework for concentration, you are watching the blueprint of consolidation. Now, if you think this is only about money markets, you are missing the psychological attack. Because the system does not just move money, it moves your identity. It tells you that your worth is visible, that your success must be displayed, that your lifestyle is proof of intelligence, that your job status equals security, that your assets equal your self-respect. So when crisis arrives, it is not only financial, it is existential. A person with heavy leverage does not only fear losing money, they fear losing face. They fear becoming the person their family warned them against. They fear being exposed as the fool who fell for hype. This is why crisis makes people do emotional things at exactly the wrong time. They reach for relief with whatever tool is available, selling at the bottom, refinancing desperately, buying another speculative asset to recover, doubling down because admitting loss feels like death. That is the hidden self in action. The hidden self does not want pain. It wants relief. But relief is not the same as wisdom. Now I want to move to a deeper layer, the mindset architecture of the new rich. You keep thinking the new rich are geniuses, or that they were born lucky, or that they have secret information. Sometimes yes, but most of the time the real difference is not intelligence. It is posture. They focus on position, not on survival. Survival is a strategy for emergencies. Position is a strategy for cycles. When the tide pulls out, the question becomes what land remains, what assets are still useful, what cash flow still functions, what connections still open doors. The new rich do not treat the crisis like a personal threat, they treat it like a market event. They ask, what will still be valuable when everyone else is exhausted? This is how you can tell a person is not wealthy yet, but is becoming wealthy. They are learning to think in terms of leverage, time horizon, and optionality. They are learning to ask what happens if unemployment rises, if credit tightens, if prices keep falling for another year. They do not run from those questions. They prepare answers. Crisis is the filter of truth. In boom times, illusions glow. Stories look plausible because prices reward them. During crisis, only real values stay standing. And here the new rich are not always building new inventions. They are often waiting long enough for fake narratives to collapse. They are picking up the usable remnants. Micro story. Think of the person who buys a company because they believe it will change the world. During boom, their optimism gets applause. Then crisis hits and the company reveals it had no durable moat. Competitors who survived restructure. Those who waited buy the survivors at reasonable terms. The new rich are not always building dreams. They are buying reality. Another pillar is discipline and restraint. Most people in crisis do the opposite of what they should. They try to swing for redemption. They want to recover lost status with one big move. But that move rarely aligns with the market. It aligns with ego. The new rich understand something cruel. The person with the most remaining ammunition decides the terms. They do not spend everything at once. They stay in the game. Another pillar is mental separation. They can watch fear without becoming fear. They can observe the crowd without absorbing it like a disease. This is a skill, not a personality trait. It is learned. You can train it by forcing your decisions through logic before emotion. Not because you are cold, because you are tired of being manipulated. There is a difference between being calm and being naive. The new rich are calm because they are disciplined, because they see cycles clearly, and because they refuse to confuse headlines with destiny. Also, they use slow periods to upgrade intelligence. While competition screams and people panic, some individuals study. They learn macro conditions, credit mechanics, law, and buyer behavior. They understand that knowledge is not entertainment. Knowledge is a shield that reduces emotional mistakes. And there is a brutal test for people in their 30s and 40s. You are not allowed to make decisions driven by short-term pressure. Pressure from family, pressure from society, pressure to look successful, pressure to do something so you can stop feeling shame. The new rich treat that pressure like noise. They act anyway, but they act with patience. They do not confuse urgency with opportunity. Sometimes the right move during crisis is nothing except cleaning your balance sheet and preserving optionality. Now, let's go even darker. because all this talk about buying discounted assets is still too clean for what is actually happening at the social level. What people are calling globalization and growth is, at its core, a transformation of ownership structures. Control no longer has to be enforced with visible force. It can be enforced through debt and through legal complexity. The new order wants you to be dependent. That is the heart of the hidden self problem for most people. You think independence is about income. It is not. Independence is about ownership of durable assets and the ability to say no without collapsing. When you own less, you become more governable, not by ideology, by economics. So the modern strategy uses crises as cover for large-scale restructurings. It tightens credit, it forces mergers, it automates labor with new technologies so human bargaining power weakens. It changes regulations under the language of stability while enabling consolidation. Then the goal becomes a system where the majority rents their life. They rent their housing, they rent their land, they rent their access, they rent their mobility, they rent their stability. And when you rent your stability, you stop arguing, you start obeying, not because you are morally inferior, because you are economically trapped. This is why the hidden self is so dangerous. The hidden self does not just hide feelings, it hides awareness. It tells you, I cannot change anything. It tells you, that's how the world is. It tells you, work harder, stay quiet, accept the plan. But accepting the plan is how you stay in the category the system needs. The exploited labor, the chronic borrower, the perpetual renter, the fearful consumer. There is another brutal part.